Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. It's a pleasure to be seeing you at this very important event this morning, and a particularly warm welcome to His Excellency Dr. Ahmed Kamali, of Egypt's Deputy Minister of Planning and Economic Development. I'm really grateful to Dr. Kamali for highlighting the Egyptian Presidency's commitment to climate-resilient investment here on Adaptation Day. And I'd also like to welcome our moderator and chair of the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment, Emma Howard-Boyd, and all of our very distinguished panellists today. Now, progress is being made on the need to double adaptation finance by 2025, as agreed last year in Glasgow. But we all recognise the need to unlock private finance if we are to reach our adaptation and resilience targets. And to use private finance efficiently, we need to better understand and more accurately price the physical risks which are faced by investors. So that's why the UK has already provided over £1 million to support the coalition in its initial phase of work with Willis Towers Watson, HSBC, the UK Environment Agency, the Investment Group on Climate Change, Mott MacDonald, S&P Global, and the University of Oxford. CCRI is composed of 126 members from the public and private sectors with $25 trillion of assets under management, and it's working to transform how climate investments are made worldwide. The coalition understands that investors need to better understand physical climate risks to be able to cost the benefits of building resilience and cost the price of inaction. The coalition's pilot in Jamaica to develop the methodology for identifying physical climate risk resulted in the Systemic Risk Assessment tool, which identifies hotspots where climate resilience should be built into transport, energy, and water infrastructure. The forthcoming phases of that pilot will identify engineering solutions and support generation of a pipeline of investment needs in Jamaica, aimed at attracting both private and public finance. So I very much congratulate the government of Jamaica, especially Dr. Wayne Henry and his team at the Planning Institute, for completing the first phase of their work with CCRI to develop those tools. And I very much look forward to Jamaica's continued work in developing solutions to optimise investment. And I'm delighted to announce today that the UK will continue its support for the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment in its next phase through an additional £1.3 million as part of a Thank you. Thank you very much. As part of the £13 million package of support for adaptation and loss and damage that we already announced on Monday. I look forward to learning more about the impact of the work in Jamaica and further country pilots. The coalition is focused on systemic change to unlock investment in climate resilience, and the physical climate risk assessment methodology, which we'll hear more about today, is a key part of that. It's been widely endorsed for infrastructure investment. So I hope investors in this room today will be among those to capitalise. And now, I'm delighted to introduce you to Dr. Kamali to provide his perspectives before Emma Howard-Boyd opens our panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Good morning. It's great to have you in Egypt and Sharm el-Sheikh. I hope that you're enjoying your time in Sharm, and also having a fruitful meetings and discussion. Now, when I was invited to participate in this event, I did not hesitate for a second, because this is very important, not only for all countries, but also definitely for the case of Egypt. I'm not going to take much of your time because we want to hear from our distinguished panelists, but let me try to emphasize three main points, which I think is extremely important. The first point is, and this is something that when I was invited to participate, this is very much encouraged me to participate and to be part of this very important event. First thing that, even before the pandemic, before what's happening in terms of geopolitical disturbances, Egypt and also many countries, even some developed countries, they have a problem in finance and capital, financing the SDGs. Actually, in 2018, in our voluntary national report that was presented in the high-level political forum in New York, we identified 4 challenges in front of the implementation of Agenda 2030. On the top of these challenges is finance. And at that time, it was not as severe problem as what we are seeing right now. At that time, the problem was not the size of finance. It was the allocation of finance. So it's the need to raise capital in order to finance impact investment. So, but as time went by, and with the pandemic, with the political disturbances that we are seeing, now the importance of finance and capital became more and more significant. And actually, if we look at lots of countries, even middle-income country, where Egypt belonged to the middle-income country, we have a problem in terms of fiscal space. It's not that only the fiscal space is shrinking, actually it's vanishing, the fiscal space. So we need to do something about that. This is an extremely important topic that we need to tackle, and we need to find innovative ways in order to address this very important problem. Another thing, which is another point, is infrastructure. And this is tied very much to the finance. If you look at the trend of the amount of debt, for example, that is taken by developing countries, and the investment on infrastructure, you're going to see that they are, there is very big correlation, very big relationship between the two. So lots of countries, lots of developing countries, lots of African countries, they are taking lots of debt in order to finance the infrastructure project. Now, of course, this is something that has to be done. Infrastructure, it is not only important for the welfare of people, it is important for to crowd out private investment, to improve the conditions of countries, and for the interconnectivity, definitely between countries and within each country. Now, Egypt actually invested a lot in infrastructure, but at the same time, there was this recognition, this is my third point, recognition of the importance of the climate risk. As you may know, Egypt is classified as highly vulnerable country to climate risk because of a number of factors. Water scarcity, because of the rising sea level waters. So, and this is affecting lots of economic activities in Egypt. The backbone of economic activity in Egypt for thousands of years was agriculture. Now, by affecting the delta, by affecting the water, this is definitely will have a significant effect on the level of economic activity in Egypt and the level of poverty, of course. So this is something that Egypt has recognized its importance. This is why, in face of the pandemic, we did not only what we did in terms of stimulus package was not only a stimulus package, it was a green recovery. It is most of the projects were dedicated in order to stimulate the economy and at the same time have a positive impact on the climate and on the environment. However, and this is, I think, a very important topic, or this is an important discussion in our side event, it's the cost associated with this. not only that, developing countries and Egypt and middle-income countries, they invest a lot in infrastructure. But trying to integrate the climate dimension represents an additional cost. And this cost is, given my second point, which is vanishing physical space, is something which is would consider is an extremely important challenge that has to be tackled. I believe that CCRI could represent for us a solution, or different solution for such a significant problem that we are facing. Now, we in Egypt, we try very much, as I said, we have so much project that has this mitigation and adaptation dimension. Whether you're talking about canal rehabilitation, the water desalination, whether you're talking about e-transportation, the shift from gas to electricity, all of these projects, they have a very big impact on the reduction of emission and to protect the environment. However, this has a cost, and we cannot, as Egypt and middle-income countries, and definitely Africa, we cannot continue depending on that, because this will affect the fundamentals of the economy. This is going to pose additional risk and vulnerability to our countries. I'm sure that this side event is going to give us some light at the end of the tunnel in order to see how we can solve this very important problem that is not going to affect countries not only now, but years and years and decades into the future. Thank you very much for for having me, and looking forward to hearing your definite intervention. Thank you very much.
Is that working? Yes, it is working. And thank you. I'm going to start off by saying a number of thank yous. I'm Emma Howard-Boyd, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment. And I firstly want to start off by thanking Dr. Kamali for welcoming us to your country and making sure that adaptation and resilience is a core part of the discussion of the implementation COP. And thank you for hosting us. We're somewhat in a cocoon here, and I've always found that my attendance at COPs has been accompanied by events elsewhere in the world, sometimes at home in the UK, where flooding may be taking place. We've certainly had a little bit of that this week, but there are other events around the world that must recognise the importance of what we're doing here. And I'd like to thank Ken, representing the UK government, for that huge statement of support, including money for the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment. It really sets us up for the next phase, and we are hugely grateful. Dr. Kamali talked about fiscal constraints. That's something that the UK government is dealing with at the moment, so we know how it's even more of a signal right now that this is a project, this is an initiative that the UK government wants to support. And if I may, I'd also like to pay tribute to my fellow co-chairs, so John Haley, who's in the room, former Chief Executive of Willis Towers Watson, and Samir Asaf, who isn't with us here today, of HSBC, because as co-chairs, getting rid of the flies, as co-chairs, I think what we try to do is represent what the coalition is all about, which is bringing the public, the private and third sectors together, representation of government, the real economy, academia, and make sure that we're building one of those radical collaborations that will really deliver on the ground. And it's been fantastic. As I look around this room, many, many familiar faces. It does feel like a family that is very much focused, not just on methodologies, but delivering on adaptation and resilience in the real world. I'm going to moderate this panel in quite an interactive way, but I am going to allow our panelists, as they join me, to make some opening statements as to why they have enjoy working with the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment and why it helps them in their day jobs. But I'm hoping in our discussion we'll build off how we work together and how we can make real stuff happen in the real world so that we are bringing resilience at pace and making sure that resilience is given as much attention as net zero ambitions. We actually believe that you cannot get to net zero without making all of your investments ready for the climate shocks that are locked in right now. Certainly my experience as former chair of the Environment Agency, I came to the end of my term about 6 weeks ago, is the rate of flooding continued to get more regular, often flip-flopping from flooding into prolonged dry weather, moving into drought. This is the world we're living in, and we need to get moving quickly. So without further ado, I'm going to invite my panelists to join me up here, and then I'll introduce you in turn. So please, would you like to come and take a seat? Thank you for your enthusiasm. Great. So I'll introduce our panelists, my panelists from in order, but then we're going to do the questions or the opening statements in a slightly different order. So to my left, we've got Dr. Wayne Henry, who's Director General of the Planning Institute of Jamaica. Thank you so much for joining us here. Really excited to hear about the work that's been taking place in Jamaica. Next, we've got Eva Cairns, who's Head of Sustainability Insights and Climate Strategy at Aberdeen. And then Marie Dion, is that correct? A Managing Director of Moody's Investors Service. And last but not least, Giampiero Nacci from the EBRD, Director of Sustainable Business and Infrastructure. And in fact, we're going to start with you, Giampiero. I know you have to leave us quite promptly to go on to another panel. So really keen to hear from your perspective at the EBRD, the importance of the methodologies that CCRI has been working on to your kind of infrastructure bank.
Thank you very much for the invitation, for having me here. I'm really delighted to be in this not only very interesting panel, but amongst these very distinguished guests. The work you're doing, and we are very proudly part of and supporting, is absolutely crucial for an institution like the EBRD. We're a multilateral development bank. We operate in a very diverse markets. We operate across all economic sectors, but also we operate with a strong focus on the private sector. And clearly, when it comes to the private sector, climate resilience is very important, growing important, but it's not so easy to finance. Your work and the work of other organizations that are in your network have, I believe, two major effects. There is a convening power, bringing experience and knowledge, but there is also the methodological work and the inputs that you provide in terms of methodological developments and standards. And I'll give you 3 examples of how this work is particularly important for the MDBs. There are 3 levels, I would say. One, which is the level of our own operations. All MDBs, including the EBRD, we have committed to become fully Paris aligned, in the case of the EBRD, by the end of this year. This means that all our projects have to pass a quite stringent test when it comes to, let's say, convergence and alignment with the adaptation, the climate resilience objectives of the Paris Agreement. So the standards are very important to undertake that assessment. But there is also the work we do upstream in working with governments, with subnational entities, in developing the policies and integrating climate resilience in climate strategies and in climate action plans. One example is the work, for example, we do in the green city space, which actually is supported by the Green Climate Fund. So at the core of the engagement with city, we developed a so-called Green City Action Plan, which actually is a work that is based on a strong diagnostic of the performance of a city compared to international benchmarks, and that's where your methodology becomes very important, but also entails the definition of a policy roadmap and investment roadmap that can support cities becoming more resilient and also address, of course, the broader issues of climate change. But then there is another element which is, for DBRD, particularly important, which is the work we do with our clients directly. So at DBRD, we have a program which we call Climate Corporate Governance Support. It's about working with our clients and helping them introducing a discipline in terms of climate risk assessment and also introducing climate considerations in investment decisions. Another example is informing financial products. At DBRD, we have been issuing the first ever climate resilience bonds on the basis of our portfolio of investments, particularly in infrastructure, in fact. And since we launched this product in 2019, this has been tapped several times, and we issued $1.15 billion of bonds in this space. So all these levels are extremely important. The MDBs as a group also work extensively on methodologies for assessing climate risk, but also tracking adaptation finance. And clearly these methodologies, but also the convening power, the possibility to share knowledge and information are critical to build the capacity and the discipline of climate risk in the policy, in our own operations, and very much in the investments that we finance.
Fabulous. So I'm going to come to Dr. Wayne Henry next, who, in your role in planning, you've been working very closely with CCRI, and really keen to hear about how you found it work for you, but the difference it has made, given that you've shown such leadership, the difference that it is beginning to make in your country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me acknowledge Dr. Kameli, Deputy Minister of Planning and Economic Development of Egypt, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me. So as you heard, Jamaica is involved in the development of a tool to assess risk and to quantify, as you would, and infuse in infrastructure in terms of the pricing of climate and the climate exposure to our infrastructure development. And we think it's important to help for our prioritization and to have data-driven solutions as we seek to treat with it. As we've been developing what we call the Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment Tool, we call it JSRAT, right? Right? So the JSRAT, it represents a collaboration with the Coalition for Climate Investment, Climate Resilient Investment, CCRI, by the Planning Institute of Jamaica, the PIOJ, which I chair, and of course collaboration with entities right across. So we have the CCRI partnering with the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK government, FCDO, the Green Climate Fund, and then FCDO provided technical assistance and financial support by engaging the University of Oxford, their Environmental Change Institute. And I know Professor Hall is here, and they led the analytical work to develop the JSRAT. And so we're pleased to associate with the CCRI. From the very start, our Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, was endorsing the CCRI at its launch in the UN Climate Action Summit in 2019. And so we saw the development of the tool as very critical for us in Jamaica. As a small island developing state, we were beset and have been beset by climate events, climate impacts, as Minister Dr. Kameli said, and as we know, that you can have made tremendous gains in terms of development gains as countries, and just one climate episode negatively impacts you and sets you back, puts you right back to ground zero. And so Jamaica had that reality, that we were beset with quite a bit of events, from flooding to hurricanes, named storms, the sea level rise, many things happening. And so for us to develop the tool was very important, and we thought it was extremely critical for us. It's in keeping with our need to build resilience. It's in keeping with our long-term development plan, or what we call Vision 2030, Jamaica National Development Plan. We've been engaging in quite a bit of activities to build resilience, utilizing preventive and adaptive measures to offset and withstand climate impacts. And so when we develop the tool, the first phase is the development of the JSRAT, the tool itself, as we said. And so the University of Oxford led consultations with local stakeholders. And that's important because the University of Oxford bring technical expertise, but you have to contextualize it into your local context. For you to get the buy-in, for you to get in terms of the data credibility, you want to ensure that you're using the right data. And as you get to proof of concept, you want to ensure that this thing works. We have a Prime Minister and a Minister of Finance that are very data-centric. They're very big on evidence solutions. And so we are in that process. So there's a lot of excitement around the development of the tool. And so we, in terms of the Planning Institute of Jamaica, we are that local partner that we do a lot of data planning. We are the main policy and advisory formulation, policy advisory and formulation agency for government in sustainable development, environmental, economic, and financial sustainability. We work with a lot of data sets. We generate data. We analyze a lot of data. And so we're a good fit for partnership. We know the local context. We do assessments of households. We do household surveys annually. We look at those general projections on the economy, sectoral assessments. We do quite a bit with the data. So we were a natural fit for the CCRI as a local partner and to work with the University of Oxford as we were doing a lot of that work. And so that was very important for us. And it has tremendous, as I speak on, I'm going to speak about the tremendous benefits we anticipate with this tool. Because we are doing a lot of infrastructure development, but as you heard, the challenge is how do you crowd in the private sector in infrastructure when it's difficult in an environment where you are vulnerable, and particularly vulnerable to climate impacts. And it's, you know, sometimes we think of SIDS, small island developing states, as being debt burdened because of poor fiscal management. And that's not the full story at all. You can be the best fiscal managers, but because you are beset year after year by climate episodes, climate events, you borrow to rebuild a highway, you borrow to rebuild a bridge, and before you finish rebuilding, another event comes. And you can look at some of our Caribbean neighbors, you can look at Jamaica and see the devastating impact, and it's getting worse in terms of the projections, as Emma has said. So you know the seriousness with which we are treating with this. And so this is very encouraging. The work of the CCRI, very encouraging. It's a collaborative process, very encouraging. And so we are excited. We are intent, we are open for business, have been, and we are moving ahead, full speed ahead. And infrastructure is a critical area for us. And we are intent on getting this done. Thank you.
Brilliant. That's fantastic to hear not only how you've been working, how you've been working at every single level, including with people. We have to remember, ultimately, this is about lives and livelihoods, and making sure that we're engaging directly with those communities who have been affected by the changing climate is absolutely key to this, as well as working at a governmental level. And I know that there are a number of people in this room who've worked on that project. So Uname and Carlos, will come back to mention you, but Jim as well. I don't know if there are people I don't know, but thank you for all of the time and effort you've put into making this work. It feeds on naturally to Marie and credit rating agencies. Perhaps you talk about how this work will help you in your assessment of credit risk. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Emma. And indeed, start by explaining where we are in our assessment, our integration of climate risk. Yeah, thank you. So we integrate climate risk. This might be more stable. We integrate climate risk in sovereign ratings because we see climate as really one of the drivers of sovereign governments' capacity to repay debt in future. I think, as we all know here, climate has an impact on economic resilience, economic competitiveness, has an impact on government debt dynamic, as Dr. Henry said, has an impact on macroeconomic and social stability. And so we see that as essential in our assessment of ratings of creditworthiness to integrate. That integration is a two-step process. There's an assessment of the exposure to the risks, which I think is well known, largely driven by geography, in part driven by the susceptibility given the fabric of the economy. But then there's the second part of that assessment is an assessment of resilience, of how sovereigns are addressing this and how they're adapting to these risks. And when we engage with sovereigns around the world, what we find is that they have a good understanding of their exposure to risks. I think by now there's a lot of tools widely available, projections going far out, even at a very local level, that show a country's exposure to risk. And of course, there's evidence through natural disasters and through trends through the years. But what we find is that governments typically have a far less well-formed assessment of what they can do about it, how they can plan that resilience. There's so far national adaptation plans that sometimes are at a broad vision stage and that are not yet translating into really concrete measures. So that's really where the tools developed by CCRI come in. And we think that one of the reasons why private finance in particular has not flowed to climate adaptation so far is that us credit rating agencies, but also creditors, financiers, are unable to assess yet what are the adaptation plan of that particular country or that particular locality, and are they likely to be effective. So the CCRI tool is particularly interesting to us because it is first a systemic tool. So that gives us that broad picture, from the particular asset level to really the broad economic picture to tell us about future economic resilience to climate. From that, we can then derive, well, what is likely to be the impact on the social impact or the social benefits from greater resilience. And we are able to derive then whether that debt is like the debt carrying capacity of the sovereign is likely to improve as a result. And the title of the panel today has that quality of capital, and that's what we're talking about. There's the quantum, but there's also the quality. Is that debt really spent in a way that will bring economic and social returns? And that's what we're expecting to be able to factor in our assessment. So, thank you.
Thank you, Marie. So Eva, over to you now in terms of how the investment community specifically can use the tools that CCRI is developing and embed them in the way you are assessing companies as well as countries.
Yes, thank you. So we talked a lot about crowding in private capital, and as a private investor, as an asset manager who invests in different asset classes across different regions, this is a really key topic for us. You know, less than 2% of adaptation finance comes from the private sector at the moment. And last year at COP26, it was all about financing net zero, and there's a lot more investment opportunities for mainstream investors with the right risk-reward profile, where you look at technologies and renewable energy, and you can create a climate solutions fund, and that's great. But we're rightly talking about adaptation much more at this COP27. And as investors, we've been looking at two things particularly. One, how do we price in those physical risks and resilience options into our assets, infrastructure assets, but also companies and publicly listed assets, so I can talk a bit more about that. And secondly, how do we identify opportunities for investing in adaptation solutions? We talked about bonds earlier. That's certainly one thing we've looked at, countries that and companies that raise finance through bonds. But particularly with CCRI, we've worked on the PCRAM framework, which helps develop a really clear framework on identifying and pricing the physical risks at an asset level, and then adding the resilience option to that. And actually understanding that while that might increase the cost initially, it makes the cash flows of that asset more stable and more certain in the future. And so therefore you need to compare the options, including that resilience built in. And that's, you know, asset by asset. That takes quite a bit of resource, effort, the data. We talked about data. That is still very much a challenge to be able to do that and have confidence that you're making your financial decisions based on that available data. So this has been a key project for us, because when we've looked at pricing physical risks in through our climate scenario analysis, one of the big challenges is, you know, those physical risks are happening now but get more severe in the future. and your traditional cash flow models discount that to today's present value, and they don't seem as financially material, whilst in 20 years they will be absolutely devastating. I think we really need to tackle that and have a better way of dealing with pricing and physical risks that are further out in the future. So this is a really great framework that we apply, and as I say, not just for infrastructure, that was one area, but also how the companies we invest in as investors, listed companies, how they prepare for physical risks and build resilience, not just to the assets, but to the supply chain, commodity shortages. It just is very systemic. So it's absolutely critical that we build that in.
Fabulous. Now, I know we're about to lose Giampiero, so before you go, I wonder whether you can make a quick comment on what we should be seeing from both the EBRD but also MDBs by the next COP. We're in a hurry. I'm in a hurry. We need to move fast. That is what we're hearing from countries like Jamaica, others at extreme risk. How can you reassure us that we're going to be moving at pace? Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Actually, I can tell you something we are doing at this COP. So let's not wait for the next COP. So two things. We're going to announce, in fact, today, a new methodology for tracking adaptation finance. It may look a bit, how should I say, MDB sort of obsession, but actually it's very important, because tracking the financial flows that goes to our countries of operations, to our clients, is absolutely fundamental to provide a signal to the market, but also to orient the investment. So today we're going to announce a new approach, a new announced methodology for tracking adaptation finance that recognize not only the need to adapt infrastructure, to adapt the economic system that we finance, but also recognizing recognizing the need to review and assess financial flows associated to enabling investments, enabling policies that actually create the resilience in the economic system. And when it comes to the EBRD, we're also announcing today our first climate adaptation action plan, which will cover the period 2023-2025, which is going to put a lot of emphasis on exactly what we've been discussing today. So looking at adaptation not only as a cost, not as an add-on, but as an investment to protect value, to preserve competitiveness of organizations and companies, and also very much as a way to create business opportunities. We strongly believe we're in Africa, we have a strong, Africa for us is a priority continent in our region. Africa has the potential to become a global leader in providing the business solutions and the business model to deliver adaptation at scale.
Brilliant. I certainly am delighted to hear about your announcements, but there is no doubt that the voices of different prime ministers, I'm thinking Prime Minister Motley, and this whole demanding for a change of the financial system is something that we're all listening to. And I'm hoping that over the next year to come, we're going to see some significant change. And it's great to hear that EBRD is working on it, and hopefully we'll be working with other MDBs to accelerate that change. Thank you very much for joining us today. Dr. Henry, let's build on that. We need urgency. You've been working in Jamaica. There's what you want to do as a country, but how you can share what you've done with your peers on other islands in other parts of the Caribbean, but equally other parts of the world. What are your plans there? Thank you.
So, as we speak of urgency, for you to move and get things done, we have to collaborate. And to do that effectively, you need buy-in, that there's shared vision, shared energy in terms of going forward. What we had, so as we spoke about the collaboration with the CCRI, with the FCDO, with the GCF, there's a tremendous partnership. And the time spent in engaging persons on the ground in Jamaica. This is an innovative tool, but then we had to engage across the board. So government, public sector, private sector, academia. And so some of the persons who handle data, people who knew Jamaica very well, we know the topography, we know the lifestyle, we know all the things there, you had to get them around the table. So we had an inception workshop in March of 2021 with the CCRI. We hosted as PIOG and had a number of stakeholders together. And as we presented a lot of what was done, a lot of the analytical work, and almost now coming to prove now concept, this is what we had in terms of design, we were inviting feedback from key stakeholders. And that was important. People heard, they saw, they were excited about it, but they could even suggest and to add, because the issue of credibility of the data, as we heard, is so important. And you want persons to be able to validate. And so we're going to have this process now where we're going to give feedback to verify the data that we've collected, to verify the tool, to apply it to its use in infrastructure in Jamaica. When we say infrastructure, we're thinking of energy, water, transport. So assets there, the infrastructure in Jamaica. And so the tool going forward, we have a mechanism in Jamaica where we assess public investments for feasibility from design right through to implementation. We call it our Public Investment Appraisal Branch, a part of the Ministry of Finance. I, as a Planning Institute of Jamaica chair, I chair a technical review committee of experts who assess public investment projects to ensure best fit and feasibility. We want to incorporate the JSRAT in terms of the ability of some projects coming through to be able to apply it, to assess it as a tool, to incorporate for the finance, and that's very important. Our Minister of Finance is very keen, and he wants to see how it comes together, and that's going to be important, that validation process. We're speaking also about the need going forward that we're going to see as we begin to scale up. So it's a pilot, but you're going to want it for scalability. And as you asked Emma about other countries, we want to be able to scale up for applications right across. And so there's a lot of similarity in the Caribbean, but then each country has its own nuances. Jamaica has made tremendous strides in terms of macroeconomic stability, and those of you, a number of you know, and Marie from Moody's, that we've reduced our debt to GDP from 148% of GDP to now 90%. We've had, fiscal reforms, tax reform, a lot of gains. But the same issue of vulnerability means you can make all those gains, and then this is a problem. So we've been on a drive now over the last number of years to build resilience and financing resilience, and to look at, climate financing, and that's a big priority for the government. And our Minister of Finance has been keen and looking at a layered approach to financing. We have the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, the CRIF, which is a very high-level parametric insurance product. But then we want to look down below. We've launched a cat bond with the help of our development partner, the World Bank. And then we're looking at different layers of building resilience. And so the JSRAT, the tool here, will help in that regard. Just as we've heard from Emma, the expert here, in terms of to be able to price and not just use the traditional discount models, how do we incorporate in an innovative way? And you've said it, Emma, we are calling for different thinking, innovative thinking. I think the challenge for MDBs now is innovation. It's not, when we speak of pivot and flexibility, it's good words, but what it means is that you have to come with something that is relevant to the changing times and has impact, because a lot of what had been done and useful at that time may not be relevant now. And what you hear from SIDS, Jamaica, and many countries, the Pacific, a lot of small island states are asking, please incorporate vulnerability. Please recognize it in a greater way, as our colleagues from the UK had started by saying. We want to see that recognition, because you can't use the traditional lending models of GDP per capita. A lot of us are excluded as middle-income countries. And people say, well, you have enough income. No, our vulnerability puts us at a worse condition, right? So yes, we're middle income, but we have severe vulnerabilities. So I think it's got to be important. So what the tool will allow for us is that you're able to quantify, you're able to see, hotspots, and you're able to proof of concept for scalability and rollout.
I'm going to bring Eva in right now quickly. You talked about how adaptation and resilience has gone up the agenda since COP26. What do we need to do next in terms of the investors, building on what Dr. Henry has said?
Yeah. I think we've talked a lot about the need to have, it really depends on the stage of, I think, the type of investment in the asset class. So we talk about the early stages of infrastructure investment for resilience in some of the developing countries where maybe the environment for bringing private finance in isn't as secure. We absolutely need those public-private partnerships to help de-risk, to help bring in more private capital into this. So I think that's a really key key one that we need to identify for those stages. How can we bring investors in? But then I also think that we need to look across different regions and the right approach across different asset classes. So infrastructure asset at early stages, we need more support and de-risking. But I talked earlier about, and you mentioned innovation there, that we have to look beyond just one asset class infrastructure, but think about innovative technologies. Think about companies or governments that are issuing bonds and the proceeds are used for flood protection or water irrigation or food technologies. I think the whole agriculture and food sector and helping to build adaptation and resilience there is absolutely critical as well. So we've identified, for example, 3 sectors where we want to focus on identifying those solutions. Real assets, so buildings and infrastructure, utilities, their electric grids, they can be very vulnerable to physical impacts as well, and food and agriculture. So it's about looking at the maturity of the markets, the type of assets, and then is the market already enabled and secure enough for private finance through things like bonds, or does it really at the early stages and need a lot more collaboration with public-private partnerships?
Thank you. Now, I heard one of the chief execs of the oil and gas sector on Monday talking about needing a orderly transition to net zero. We're actually living in a pretty disorderly world, and we're all having to learn to adapt to things. So we're going to take one final comment from you, Marie, before Yannick comes and makes some closing remarks, and then we're going to come back to the panel for their final closing remark, just to adapt to the situation. So Marie, your comments on what's just been said by Eva and Dr. Henry.
Exactly. I think linking all this and linking what you said about the desire for an orderly transition, orderly adaptation. I don't know if we can desire that, but what again, as rating agency, when we look ahead and see trouble, see really shocks and negative trends, what we find is that what helps right through that is governance. And I think in what you said, Dr. Henry, there's a lot, I heard a lot of governance in that, the work that you've done, connecting different sectors, different stakeholders, different parts of the administration, thinking about the sequencing of decisions and the transparency that comes with using tools like the resilience tools. I think all of that speaks to governance, and it is likely that the sovereigns and maybe the projects that will attract private sector investment in particular are the ones that are likely to show that strength of governance throughout. So.
Brilliant. So I'd like the panelists to stay here on their seats while we listen to some reflections from Yannick Glamarek from the Green Climate Fund, your executive director there. Thank you very much. So would you like to speak to us from here?
Okay. If we turn it on, it tends to work better. My apologies to the panelists for my over-enthusiasm and taking one of their seats. I couldn't wait to state my support to CCRI. And my apologies for coming with concluding remarks a few minutes before the conclusion of the meeting. I'm due for a signing ceremony at 10:30, and I wouldn't like the project proponent to start freaking out. The mandate of the Green Climate Fund is to accelerate climate innovation and investment. And as part of this mandate, one of the key concerns is the built environment, infrastructure. There is a huge infrastructure investment gap. It has been there already for a while. It's in the trillions of dollars. And we know that this gap is to increase, and increase quite dramatically in the next 2 decades, for some of the reasons mentioned by His Excellency Dr. Kamali, and for other reasons. So if we do nothing, we are basically about to smash against the wall. And for me, CCRI is an initiative that provides us an unbelievably powerful solution to reduce investment needs and accelerate investment in infrastructure. And I see at least 3 opportunity points to reduce the total investment need and increase and accelerate the amount of investment in infrastructure. The first opportunity point is systemic resilience assessment. We know that trying to strengthen each infrastructure one by one in isolation will cost a fortune, and actually nobody will ever be able to do that. By basically taking a network approach, overlaying the road network, the electricity network, the water network, the telecommunication network, and the hazard map, suddenly we can identify the most vulnerable points, and we can prioritize those who cannot go offline. And so rather than having to strengthen thousands of infrastructure, we can maybe go down to a couple of dozen of infrastructure that cannot go offline because you do not have an Ethernet pathway for electricity, for water, or for transport. So it's a gigantic investment needs reduction opportunity through integrated planning. So this systemic resilience assessment, it's something that has an importance that cannot be overstated. The second part of it, the second opportunity point is that once you have done that, you can basically try to come up with the best portfolio of grey and green infrastructure. And so here, should I reforest my watershed? Should I create a storm surge absorption area? Or should I go for hard infrastructure? And here again, it's a way to reduce cost in a tremendous manner. And the third opportunity point for us is that once you know what is your portfolio of priority grey and green infrastructure, you can do financial engineering. Okay, what kind of projects can be financed by the private sector? What kind of project can be financed by the private sector, but we need some policy de-risking, such as streamlined licensing processes? What kind of projects can be financed by the private sector, but we will need not only policy de-risking, we will need financial de-risking, such as, for example, credit enhancement for issuing bonds. And after the fourth category, what kind of project can only be financed by the public sector? And so we can use suddenly scarce public money in a highly catalytic manner to make the life of investor easier and to catalyze finance at extremely high flows. The approach of the PCRAM, which basically demonstrates that investing in climate resilient assets is an investment, is not a cost, is extremely powerful because it's opened completely new opportunities for the private sector. Now the Green Climate Fund, on our side, we provide some capacity development support to every single country in the world for them to be ready to scale up their climate action, and they decide what does it mean to be ready. We will be paying a very close attention to any request from any countries that we will receive to try to reproduce this kind of approaches through their NDCs, through their NAPAs. The second thing is that we are one of the largest investors in the field of strengthening hydrometeorological system and early warning system. We understand that it's key to have the right data to be able to conduct the type of assessment done by necessary for PCRAM, and we will be there for this kind of investment. The third thing is that we will be there for de-risking specific projects, policy de-risking, financial de-risking. And for example, in Jamaica, we are already working with the government on what could be 2 or 3 of the follow-up projects that we could support out of this optimal portfolio of grey and green infrastructure. Many thanks, and once again, my apologies for my over-enthusiasm.
Thank you very much. We love your over-enthusiasm and really hope to hear more in the next few weeks and months to come. Good luck. Thank you. Yes, this is definitely a long-term effort that we're all on. We've only got a couple more minutes left, so I would really at this point like to encourage each of the panelists to perhaps highlight their ambitions for CCRI that can help us as the leaders, and I do want to say a very, very big thank you to Carlos Sanchez, without whom none of this would have happened. So your ambitions for CCRI, so that as we develop the strategy, as we build on the finances that the UK government has given us, and as we look at what we need to do in the next steps, how we can help you. So starting with Marie and then finishing with you, Dr. Henry, if we could do it in that order. Thank you.
Ambition, I would say more of the same. The more examples we get of countries adopting tools like the systemic resilience assessment tool, the more we will be able to understand, really integrate that in our credit, in our rating assessment. We will be able to really aggregate this, sit back and communicate that to financial markets and have this engagement with investors and test, is this what you need to factor in not only the short-term investment, the short-term increment in debt, but the long-term then benefits in terms of reduced risks. So yes, the more, the better.
Eva.
I will add to that. So absolutely, the collaborative aspect between private and public, continuing that through CCRI. And I think really importantly, we talked earlier, Yannick mentioned understanding the different types of infrastructure and where private finance is already could be involved, and where more de-risking is needed at different levels, but also understanding the different types of private investors, because this is not one big bucket. There's different institutional investors, there's different investors that have certain objectives, certain risk-return expectations. So tackling those as well and understanding the difference and how we engage with the different types of private investors to understand at that differentiated level what is needed to bring their private finance in. And I think CCRI is a great platform to enable that discussion and collaboration. We could have a big COP27 outcomes session on that.
Fabulous. Dr. Henry.
Thank you so much. Let me acknowledge our Minister with responsibility for climate, Minister Matthew Samuda, Minister of Jamaica, and a lot of energy driving the charge. The CCRI initiative, excellent for us, tremendous value. It represents innovation. For SIDS, we've been asking for incorporating assessing risk, assessing financing in a new way, and this represents that kind of a solution. It's about access to capital. It's about cost of capital, so it's very important. And so for us, it aligns with what we are trying to do as a country in terms of building resilience and our strategic imperative. And I think it's very, it represents tremendous value for us. And we think, as we build it out and can scale up, it will have tremendous value, not just for the Caribbean, but SIDS broadly. So thank you again for the opportunity. I think this is extremely, extremely valuable, extremely useful. And we want to thank Carlos and the team at the CCRI and just how we've collaborated on the type of buy-in, as you've heard from the GCF, from the British government, FCDO, academia, and the type of robust analysis. I think data is a challenge across the board for SDGs in a development landscape. And so as we get data, and sometimes this is sensitive data, think about it. And some companies, some utilities that have data, you have to get their buy-in, because these are, they're not going to just share, they have to be understanding the overall vision and the value for everyone. So as you especially get to that critical issue of sensitive data sharing, then you need that collaboration. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you to you all. I don't know whether the Minister, we were springing on this on you, and we're almost out of time, but if you did want to say a very, very brief word, thank you.
Brief words and politicians don't usually go together, but it's indeed my pleasure to join you, and I want to thank the Government of the United Kingdom and indeed Carlos and the team at the CCRI for the significant support that I know we are getting in Jamaica, certainly in the broader CARICOM region and Caribbean region. The JSTRAT, Jamaica Systemic Risk Assessment tool, launched earlier, I think is representative of the collaboration that is absolutely critical for small island developing states and indeed the entire developing world. We've been stuck in the cycle of poverty for a long time, and climate change only exacerbates that and strengthens that cycle of poverty. And this tool, I think, is so important because it creates a roadmap to break that cycle of poverty. It says to your investors that you've done the work on the data and you can plan for investments that will be resilient and that will have an ROI. And for that, we're very thankful to have joined with the UK government, CCRI, GCF, I know Yannick would have just left, and indeed the University of Oxford. And while I'm here, it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge Una Mae Gordon, who would have led the charge on behalf of our team. So thank you for the opportunity to join your panel.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think we're out of time, and I think we need to close. We can carry on talking outside. A huge thank you to my panel for their comments today, and a thank you to you all for the work that you have generously given to us. To Dr. Kamali as well, thank you very much for hosting us in this wonderful country. And onwards, we've got a lot of work to do. Let's get moving. Thank you.